Good morning, bro.
Alright,
How are you?
ito na tayo.
How are you, amigo? How
Sabi ko nga,
are
Bigo,
you?
sabi ko nga, Bigo, ikaw nandito ka na, ako bagong gising, nandito pa lang.
Let's go, bro.
Habulin na kita, mag-uunat na
Bro,
ako
gaganyan
ng
ako,
konti.
tapos gaganyan ako. Doom, ganun.
Ay, in the middle of the episode, mag-meet tayo.
Mag-meet
Tapos
tayo.
baliktad na ako na lamang sa energy level mo.
Ano yung parang Benjamin Button ba yan? Yung
Oh,
parang
oh.
nag-abutan sa gitna. Makes sense. Alright,
Wala
amigo.
na, nagunat na ako. I'm
Let's
getting
go,
there, I'm
let's
getting there.
go. Let's talk, amigo. Let's talk truths, the reality. Alright. Okay, bro. So, apparently last week medyo nagkakalat na naman ako on Twitter among others, trying to ruffle feathers. No, actually not trying to ruffle, trying to call out nonsense, right? So, ginang war ako ng last week na yan. So many people were trying to get back at me. But it was very polite naman. I think it really started when I tried to respond to, I think, Renato Reyes or something like that. The usual
Bro,
crimes.
mo gang war, kasi yung ibang gang, iba na yun, ha?
Yeah. So no, it was interesting in a sense that ang dami kong mga kaaway on Twitter. No, but you know what I try to do, right, Lele? My point is, if you want to fight the political fight the proper way, right, you have to get your intellectual department also updated and upgraded. So the software has to be upgraded. And that was always our thing, right, bro? The software doesn't seem to catch up with the reality of our geopolitics today. Later on, we'll discuss in another episode about domestic politics in the Philippines. But of course, the big issue right now is enhanced defense coercion agreement. I'll be honest, Leloy, the more I think about it, I mean, I did like 7 articles on Edca over the past 2 weeks or so.
Dapat talaga bugbugin tong isyung to eh.
Yeah, this is like, bro, the more I think about it,
so important so many levels, as you'll see.
Exactly. The more I think about it, the more I'm not so sure anymore. Like, I think Marcos Jr. has the correct instinct, but due to lack of information, because I'm not, privy to what's happening internally, how much of reassurances we're getting, I also have some reservations, right? Nevertheless, Lele, as I pointed out, the parameters of any discussion about Edca has to acknowledge certain fundamental geopolitical realities, right? A, it's not the US that wants to invade Taiwan. It's not the US that wants war over Taiwan. It's China that is threatening invasion of Taiwan. That's very important. B, as far as the Philippines is concerned, we have zero minimum deterrence capability on our own. So there's no way that sariling sikap na lang yung strategy. It doesn't work. It's a nice slogan, but it just doesn't work. And C, whether it's ASEAN or whether it's diplomacy, we saw that with Tatay Digong, it doesn't work. ASEAN made zero support for our arbitration award when it came out in 2016. You can partly blame Tatay Duterte, but Tatay Digong said, you know what, let's engage China, maybe a bit more than engagement, whatever you want to call that. But it didn't work. It produced nothing. So direct engagement doesn't work. ASEAN is not there for us. We don't have our own capabilities on our own to minimum malang. We don't even have a single squadron of modern fighters. We only have upgraded fighters, the FA-50. And it's not US that is trying to provoke war over Taiwan. It's China that is threatening war over Taiwan. Now, with those 3 facts in mind, let's go on. Let's have a debate about Edca. That's what I'm saying. Kasi parang yung tatlo pa lang yan, medyo hindi yata, hindi nag-sink in dun sa mga ibang kaibigan natin dyan. And last thing I want to say, I want to get you in on that. We're also seeing some weird horseshoe phenomenon here whereby I listen to Tatay Digong SMNI, I listen to some of our friends na pa-left or left, they sound exactly the same. They sound exactly the same on Edca. I mean, what's going on? Of course, we're not surprised. And here you come. Sige, go, bro.
Hindi naman surprising. Diba? Kasi aliado naman talaga sila nung early years. And one of the reasons bakit sila nag-aliado noong 2016, 2017, nagkaroon pa nga ng mga leftist cabinet members is precisely because na-attract yung left sa anti-Americanism ni Tatay Digong. Meron akong i-add na isa pang premise, not as important as your other premises. But the other premise I want to add is a kind of conceptual premise, which is that state behaviors change. Right? They're not the same. So the United States of today is not the United States of the Cold War, which was governed by a policy of anti-communism and governed by the principle of domino theory, which we can explain. Right. It is also not the same as the United States of the Iraq War era, which was defined by a foreign policy of neoconservatism, in other words, that pupugutan natin ng mga ulo yung diktador across the world, and if we need to go to war with them, we will. Right? The foreign policy of the US now is actually in a very interesting moment. It's in an evolutionary moment, precisely because of the threat of China. And my sense is that hindi pa fixed yung foreign policy ng US when it comes to China, that it can in fact still be influenced by its partners like the Philippines. This is not a fixed doctrine, right? The way the Cold War doctrine became fixed by the 1960s. It's also not a fixed doctrine in the way that the Bush doctrine was fixed. It's an evolving doctrine. So kailangan talaga natin makipagbaliktaktakan about it, and hindi natin ma-appreciate kung ano nangyayari kung nakapako tayo dun sa idea na the US hates the Philippines and wants to make sure na mga diktador lang yung manalo sa Pilipinas at magsisend ng mga CIA agents sa Pilipinas. Yung ganong klaseng paranoid.
Nanalo si Duterte, right? 2016. So, I mean, it just tells you like maybe things are... No, I mean, what I want to say on this is China is also not the same. I mean, I understand. Yeah. I mean, remember, Maoism, global history, right? The whole level issue. Like in the 60s, 70s, I don't know, Mao was seen as kind of a alternative revolutionary figure. He was very cool. That Maoism was very cool among young people. The whole 1960s protest movement. But it's not, we are not dealing with the same China. Maoist China was a weak, poor, revolutionary, aggressive, wild, sometimes even interesting kind of a regime for many people outside, especially people in the left, progressive movements, etc. The China of today is your classic rising hegemon, right? With classic imperialistic kind of objectives, right? It's not Russia, because Russia is a declining, in denial ex-empire. It's a very different picture. That's why they just invaded Ukraine. They have to make a raison d'etre for themselves. This is not Putin's Russia we're talking about. But China is not the Tianxia harmony. This is not the China of 1450s, right? Or this is not the China of 1670s, which was not even in position to dominate much of the world. China was always a regional power before the advent of modern era. And that China only really changed in recent years with Xi Jinping, we discussed. And, China now is a global power in ways it never was, right? Just the technology it has, just the military it has, just the resources it has. There's no precedence for that in human history, right? So that's what I'm saying. You cannot see, because in the 60s, maybe it made sense to look at China or even Soviet Union for some people as a way to check the hegemony of the United States, because the US was by far the biggest economy, the most dominant power in the 50s, 60s, 70s. That's not the issue right now. US and China are almost the same size of economy. By some measures, even China is bigger. Purchasing power parity, the Chinese military spending and purchasing power parity is very similar to the US. And again, it's not US that is trying to take away West Philippine Sea from us. No one is denying the horrible things they did in the past. That's not the question. The question right now is what's happening in 2023. In the same way, the United States, you correctly pointed out, Leloy, I think natauhan din sila. They really saw the limits of their power. The Bush was really the last hurrah. So if there's one thing common between Obama and Trump is both are isolationists. Both are skeptical about the utility of American power to push for regime change and promote American way of life, right? So, and Biden is, he's not a fool. He realizes America is not the same. That's why Biden is working with allies. That's why AUKUS, that's why JAFUS, that's why NATO. Because US realizes it's no longer the superpower it was, the way it was in the 1960s and 70s. So yun ang problema ko dun sa mga ibang attack sa Edca, because I can see the legitimate concerns with Edca, which we'll discuss right away, but it's premised on a characterization of America, which is so 50 years ago.
Yun ang problema. A lot of the people na sobrang vehemently anti-American, they still think it's the politics of their youths. And if I may, I want to psychologize them a little bit. Maybe, they feel like the activism that they went through their youth is the kind of activism that their children and grandchildren should undergo today, because they learned so much from, na hindi ko ipagkakailayon sa inyo. If you enjoyed your youth, if you enjoyed the radicalism of your youth, that's fine. And if the analysis was correct at that time, that's fine as well. But the fact is that the activism of this generation cannot be your activism. And that's really what frustrates me about some of these old-timers. Pangalawa, the second reason why hindi gumagalaw is when merong psychological barriers from movement, matigas lang talaga yung ulo. Pangalawa is, of course, the ideological barrier, because let's face it, the doctrine for many of our leftists, their Bible was a document written by Jose Maria Sison decades ago, right? Yung kanyang Philippine society and revolution, which they still think is the basis of a proper analysis of society. And the thing with Bibles is that is that they get you into trouble, especially if you interpret them literally, because they're static. So you have a text that's static, hindi nagbabago. Lalo na ngayon, hindi na pwedeng baguhin. Namatay na yung nagsulat eh. Buti sana kung buhay pa siya, baka pwede pa ma-update. Although matigas din ulo ng matandang yun, di ba? So you have a static text, and then you have a moving politics. Nakuyari ka dyan, di ba? Hindi talaga magbabago yung pag-iisip mo. So the psychological boundary and the textual boundary prevents us from seeing that. Right. What I want to do now is like, as a historian, really dig into the evolution of the US, because these people think, alam mo, this is one thing I find weird. Ang tao nagbabago yan, di ba? You know, I was very different from where I was 10 years ago. And, you know, some people who liked me 10 years ago don't like me anymore. Some people who didn't like me 10 years ago like me now because I'm a different person, right? So nagbabago yung interpretation. States are the same, right? Because in fact, states are less consistent than people because they're constituted by shifting electorates. They're constituted
maybe not Russia. I won't say maybe not Russia. Yeah, I mean,
but by democratic states, right?
Yeah. Let to be specific. Yeah.
Different bureaucracies, diba? So you can't interpret them as people. Now the way we started to interpret the United States is para yung yung traidor na best, yung in the thinking of many leftists, yung traidor na best friend mo dati na hindi mo pagbibigyan kahit anong mangyari, diba?
Aguinaldo felt that way, no? Aguinaldo,
or the violent husband who has actually been violent from day one, ganyan. So wala kang mahihita dyan. But what we really need to do is to show, again, and we've really started the discussion, to show that these states, the United States and China, are change. You know, they change, and because they change, we need to change our assessment of what to do relative to them.
And the international system also has changed, right? The global political economy is not the same, right? You know, China's concerns with Taiwan in certain ways are ancient, but China's capabilities in many ways are cutting edge, right? There are things that China can do today that was unthinkable 20, 30 years ago. I'll just give you one example. Hypersonic missiles, for instance. Hypersonic missiles don't follow a certain given trajectory, so the old missile systems don't work. Artificial intelligence, right? 5G, 6G network. There's so much at the disposal of superpowers today that was not there before. And the change in technology also reshapes how powers think about what is possible and what is not possible. At the same time, of course, Lelo, we also have, you know, strong scrutiny of national governments in democracies, right? You know, there's right now, for instance, the U.S. Congress has essentially withdrawn the war powers that it gave to the United States presidents in the past, right? So there's a concerted effort by the U.S. Congress to make sure there's more checks and balance so that what happened in Iraq will not happen again. Again, there are many, many moving parts here. The international system is changing. And you know what's interesting, Leloy? What helps me to understand all of this is kind of Karl Marx analysis, right? Agency. Like, that's a funny thing. Our critique of the left today is very much driven by actual Karl Marx Hegelian analysis, right? I mean, I'm very influenced by G.W. Hegel. One of the things that always drove me was negation of negation. Don't only go for critics, but also understand what's the shortcoming of the critics, right? Negation of negation. This is very Hegelian, and Karl Marx was very much influenced by that. Karl Marx himself was a journalist. He wrote for business newspapers, I think in Frankfurt. He wrote for New York. No offense to certain people, but certain people who did the catechism of some of the folks here, I mean, I'm not sure they were as dynamic intellectual as Karl Marx.
And you know, matter, right? Marx actually read a lot of right-wing material, or what
business. He was a business journalist.
Yeah. You know, one of his favorite publications was The Economist, which many
our good friend,
market center right newspaper until today.
Exactly. So this is the thing. The best way to criticize the shortcomings of the supposed left today is actually going back to Karl Marx himself. I suppose you also read the biography, right? Karl Marx and 90th Century Life. Was that the title of that? It was a beautiful book that showed the human side, his intellectual vitality, the savviness of his mind. Now, I have serious concern with Marxism. I have serious concern with communism and everything like that. And this is some of the disagreements I have with people like Joseph Scalise, for instance. I think Joseph Scalise has fantastic analysis on many issues, but I think for him to say it's just the
Ganda
fault
ka
of
pala
Stalin to
podcast,
them.
bro.
Yeah, parang yung argument niya is that, hindi, it's kasalanan lang ni Stalin yan, kaya it went off the rail. I don't buy that. I don't buy that. I think, honestly, I find that's a little bit Orientalist because Stalin comes from Georgia. And if you look at the law of Oriental, like, Georgians yan, they're wild, they're wrestling people. No, honestly, if you look at the law of biography of Stalin, they're very Orientalist, right? So, yeah, my sense is not the idea na, if it was Trotsky, things would have. No, I don't buy any of that. I think there was something rotten really at the core of the Communist project because it was based on a misinterpretation and a freezing of Karl Marx's very dynamic analysis of reality. But anyway, I just noticed that's the irony that when I criticize, some of these outdated analysis, I actually draw a lot on, new Gramscian, new Marxist analysis, among others. No, and not the traditional American realism, blah, 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 all of those things. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The international system is also evolving. But okay, Lela, just to make it clear, because I think some people are misinterpreting us, or perhaps at least me in this case, na parang I am endorsing naman Edca 100%. No, I don't. Actually, I still have concerns. I'm still trying to get to know about it. Just the other night, I had 3 hours of conversation. One person serving the military, another person was a top official in the Philippine Navy. It's for a TV program I'm doing. So later on, people will get to know more about that. So after that long 3-4 hour conversation the other night, parang lala ko napaisip, wait lang, is Marcos going too far into the American camp here? Is Marcos putting all the chips on the table, or maybe not? Maybe there's still room for maneuver. This is where suddenly I'm kind of arguing with myself, because you tell me, Leloy. So my argument is the Philippines is still hedging. What do you mean hedging? We have still not put 100% of our chips on the American side. Marcos Jr. still wants to play the game. He wants to still have leverage with China. I won't be surprised, hedging, just like in finance, stock market, right? You kind of go 70 here, but you want to still be in position to put 30 here, and then later I'll take out some 20 there and put here, right? This constant move back and forth. I feel the Philippines is still in the mix in that sense. I don't think that Philippines is the deputy, exactly, which should be, right? But a part of me was also worried, but maybe that's how I think about it. But what if Marcos Jr. is not as savvy, right? What if Marcos Jr. is so excited about acceptance by the West that he just went 100% in? That's my worry. But in fairness, naman, talking to some people who know the operational reality better than me, there was at least one person I really respect who used to serve in the military, said that actually, if you think of it, Marcos actually is ahead of the curve. It's actually the bureaucracy that's trying to catch up with him. So I don't know. Ikaw, what is your read on it? Do you think Marcos Jr. knows what he's doing, or he knows enough that he will not make super mistakes here? Because my fear is baka we'll give too much to the Americans here and lock ourselves into the...
Anong definition mo ng too much? Mavulis ang definition mo ng too much, di ba, Richard?
Okay, so I ask also some of the operational experts on this. See, Leloy, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to adjust. I'm willing to revisit my own analysis, right? Within 1 week, I'm willing to do that. So I'm not going to stick. I asked a question. What's the fact that we didn't give Mavulis and Fuga? I asked people, operational people, right? People who know, like, one argument is that, well, I mean, it's not big enough, or it's not perhaps as strategically important to the Americans or something. That's one I got. And the other one on the Balikatan relocation from Ilocos to Zambales, I was told na it's possible next year babalik yan si Ilocos Norte or something like that. So, but my sense is the people who were telling me that is because they want the Philippines to align with the US. But I don't buy that. I think Marcos still has some tricks up his sleeves, and I think he can still make some moves and counter moves here. My sense, Lelo, is our Chinese counterparts are kind of confused. I just had the talk with Beijing University today. I was just looking at the comments of the Chinese ambassador Huang here today. I think yung Chinese napapaisip talaga sila, like, what's going on with this Marcos Jr.? Is he still willing to open up with us, or he's like really gone, to the other side, the dark side, or like Jedi side, or whatever, right? Ikaw, what's your instinct here? What's your instinct here, Leloy?
Yung on the ground reality, I mean, I don't know.
Kaya nga instinct I ask it, because I have my general framework. But once I ask more operational questions, suddenly like, I'm not so sure we may have as much room for maneuver as I thought. Although my sense is if it's Marcos is savvy enough, we can still have some room for maneuver here. But then again, can I vouch for Marcos Jr. on that? I don't know. You're the historian. You tell me.
I can't either. Pero parang I'm getting the sense that pwede mong laruin 70-30, 60-40.
Exactly.
Pero at the end of the day, the die is cast in terms of push comes to shove, sino yung pipiliin mo. I think he's already telegraphed that. Right? Pwede kang bumawi ng konti, you can tack back a little bit from the Chinese. Pero at the very least, what all of these actions have shown is that kung magkaroon ng gera talaga between the United States and China, sino pipiliin ng Pilipinas? Kasi ngayon may element of hindi pa siya zero-sum game, right? But if push comes to shove, if there's a war or if there's an invasion of Taiwan, that's a kind of either or decision. And I think what Marcos has already telegraphed is that in that either or decision, we're joining the Yankees, baby. And I think that's a huge step. And there's no way to, or it will be very, very difficult to walk that back at this point.
Yeah. Ako ganito, okay.
I think that's okay. And I have no problem. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with that.
Right.
It's really not the United States that is the great expansionist power in the South China Sea.
Not anymore,
And
not
in
anymore.
South
Yeah,
Asia,
it's a conservative. Sorry, Lela, I'm cutting you because you can say I'm constantly still thinking inside. No, I'm still. I mean, I always follow the Fitzgerald rule, right? If you're really intelligent, you can keep two opposing ideas and still keep sane, right? Inside. No, Lelo, you know. So one thing that got me a little bit worried is, I mean, I understand the politics of this. Was this? So Marcos is saying, hindi natin ipagamit sa mga Amerikano itong mga base na ito for offensive operations. Kung sakali ang Amerika gusto mag-preemptive strike sa China or certain major intervention to stop or cut off a Chinese siege of Taiwan, if not all-out war. And then just the next day, you have a top spokesman in AFP saying, no, those bases will be used for any for any emergency situations, right? Like you cannot stop the Americans once you give it to them. So parang a part of me is thinking, what's going on here? Is this the political Marcos just trying to make sure no one panics, or is this because Marcos doesn't really appreciate the gravity of what he has green lighted? Do you get what I'm saying here? Right? So parang may mga times na napapaduda ko, wait lang, nakits pa ni Marcos kasi basahin mo yung preamble ng Edca, basahin mo yung details. No? I mean, I've been writing, so I had to go through the details, all of that. Parang, wait lang, this gives a lot of prerogative to the Americans, right? So, why would Marcos say anything? Kaya sabi ko, si Marcos has to be honest and come out and say, huwag kayo magpanic. We're not here to provoke China. We're here to prepare, and we are here to deter. But there's risk. That's why we have to be prepared as a nation. Kaya, for me, that's a responsible presidency, right? You take the risk, but you're also honest enough to prepare your people. Parang feeling ko kapos doon. Now, kapos siya dahil hindi na na-appreciate yung gravity of the situation, or kapos siya dahil hindi na nagigets yung gravity of the situation. So now it's my dilemma, right?
I think that I thought about something. Baka kapos siya because he's not used to accountability.
Right.
Kasi nung kampanya pa lang, hindi na siya nagpapa-interview, di ba? So he's used to this idea of, I'll just do it, I'll make executive decisions, and then bahala na kayo to decide whether or not you like it. And then, I have trolls anyway who will convince everyone else na tama ako.
Wala na. Nag-Vic Rodriguez, na lahat, Amy Marcos, and all na yung nag-defend.
That's true, pero doon siya nasanay, di ba? Kasi ganun siya nanalo eh. Never naman siya as a presidential candidate, never naman siya naging heart to heart sa taong bayan, heart to heart siya sa mga followers niya sa social media niya, but he did not really speak to the country as a whole, and hindi siya nagpapa-interview, and so he thinks he can just do things and get away with them without really explaining them, because he never really explained anything in the campaign. So baka sanay siya dyan. And so this is a moment where you just have to encourage the president and say, well, you know, Mr. President, you're a very popular man. You have high
we
trust.
have different episodes for that, the popularity.
Oh.
I actually can see already some of the supporters of Marcos commenting here, oy, nag-speculate na naman kayo dyan. Well, obviously, we're really speculating in an educated way. Ako, Lele, I would say this, no? I actually appreciate your intervention, because so now you see where my analysis is kind of having an internal debate, right? So ang basa ko dito, Leloy, is Marcos Jr. has a tendency to a little bit, you know, pag may konting pushback, biglang siya, di ba? Like, he's not as stubborn and hard-headed and as full conviction politics as he should be. Yun yung medyo tendency na nakita ko sa kanya, na kung konting i-push mo siya, he tends to, okay, I'll spell it out. I think he has to show more backbone on some of these issues. I think in fairness naman to him, in terms of the decision, the big decision, he has already come in strong. He has made some decisive moves, in fairness to him. But I think he has to back that up also with some really brave interventions and really addressing the people. So I look forward to the State of the Nation address this year. He has to tell the Filipino people, we have made some big decisions here because we're facing challenges and we have to get prepared. If I see that later this year, I'll be happy. But if he doesn't give that, then I'm going to be really worried. Like, wait lang, what's going on here? Kasi, Lelo, hindi pwedeng, in short, paninindigan mo na to. Kasi medyo nag 70% in ka na eh. Not all in, I would say, but 70% in is still a lot, right? So you have already crossed the 50-50 threshold. So
may Rubicon, talaga may Rubicon, Richard. He can tack it back, pero nag-Rubicon na yan eh. Just the fact na ginamit mo na yung EDSA, andyan ka na eh. Parang, and mahirap na i-walk back, and meron ka ng perception na mas pro-America kaysa sa pro-China eh.
Yeah, but the Rubicon is also...
I don't see how he can walk this back easily eh. So kung ganyan na yung gagawin mo, you really need to justify it already. And you really, I mean, you need to address the big elephant in the room nga, which is, as you said, itong Tatay Digong School of Diplomacy. Now, maybe that's one of the reasons why he isn't talking about it in public, because he wants to maintain the kind of detente he has with the DDS supporters. And of course, kung nagsalita siya and pinaliwanag niya, that might mean a kind of collision course between himself and the DDS. I don't know, di ba? Pero this is obviously, as you've said, a kind of clear disagreement between the Marcoses and the Tatay Digong School of Diplomacy. And of course, the Tatay Digong School of Diplomacy is kind of one of the worst schools of diplomacy.
It has no credibility because it didn't deliver. It had 6 years to deliver. Delivered us nothing. It delivered us net negative. In fact, I'll be very clear. I don't buy this argument. No due respect to some of our friends, I don't buy this argument that magpasalamat tayo kay Tatay Digong dahil nung minura niya ang Amerika, mas sineryoso tayo ng mga Amerikano. Kaya ngayon si Marcos Jr. ay nasa isang strategic sweet spot to get the best out of... You know what I'm saying? But I'm hearing that narrative more and more. And I was like, wait lang, that sounds like a Cambridge Analytica way of spinning things. No, Tatay Digong had no grand strategy. He was going with his instinct, just like a barangay, barangay geopolitics, right? And he got some things right, he got some things wrong, but I would say net, it was a negative for the Philippines. I think there could have been so much done to fortify our alliances, to fortify our position in the West Philippines, among others, while giving credit to Lorenzan and many people in the government who did a good job of developing our facilities in Pagasa, etc. No, I don't buy that. I think that's a retrospective kind of a rewriting of history in a very interesting way. But yun nga eh, you see what the difficulty we have right now, no? It's like, but ako naman, a part of me is saying, baka naman talaga Marcos Jr. learned enough from his dad. Because, di ba, that's my argument. We can argue, I mean, the human rights record of the dictatorship was horrible, obviously, ipso facto. The economic management, our good friend JC Punangbayan has already written a book about that. Okay. But on foreign policy, I would say Marcos Sr. was not too bad. In fact, I think he was one of the most savvy presidents we have had. Next, I would think of FVR, right? A cousin of his. So a part of me is feeling Marcos Jr. naman had so much exposure with geopolitics and so much exposure to his own dad's legacy that placed him perhaps in a good position to appreciate the risks that he's running right now with some of these big decisions he's making today. Again, you're the historian, perhaps you can call me out, but I don't know. So far naman mukhang yung prognostications ko about Marcos Jr. are coming true. My fear though is maybe I'm giving too much credit here sometimes. Yun lang. I just want to make sure I don't overcorrect or undercorrect rather for that matter. I don't know, you tell me. But if I were to make an argument, this would be my argument. President Marcos Jr. has to be honest with the Filipino people that there's risk with what he's doing. But this is not a risk of intentional provocation, because we need to be prepared. We need to deter. Taiwan is too close. We're a U.S. ally. There's no way out of it. There's no Tatay Digong way of neutrality out of this. We are already in this. Might as well prepare for it. But the president has to be honest to the Filipino people, and he has to prepare us accordingly. And we need to use whatever window we got before a potential conflict or kinetic action to build our capabilities, to have a whole-of-nation approach and move forward. This is what I'm going to say. If I were to give that advice to the president...
Basic yan. Tsaka yung lagi mong isang sinasabi, yung deterrence. Diba? Deterrence is what's important here. You don't want to make the Chinese feel na papasok na lang sila bigla And then pwede
Take it to
sila
water.
mag in and out, yariin yung mga fishermen natin, and there are no consequences. That's the most important thing, because you said that how much money are we losing? How much money are fishermen
$100 million. That's a conservative estimate by the Marine Science Institute of University of the Philippines. That's a conservative institute. So my suspicion is 1 billion per year in fisheries pa lang yan. Not to mention yung mga oil and gas na hindi natin na-develop sa reed bank. Matagal na dapat na-develop natin, Lelo, 2010, 2011 now, we were doing exploration na sana. So China is preventing. So we're losing billions of dollars in foregone and illegally, piling.
Billions talaga, Richard, billions talaga. Billions of dollars,
yes, bro. Of course, billions of dollars, bro. This is big time what we're losing. Our resources are worth trillions of dollars. And by the way, Lelo, we're only talking about West Philippine Sea. Hindi natin alam yung nangyari sa Benam Rice and Philippine Sea, which is as if not more resource rich, but we don't have any domain awareness capability. So this is the second part of my argument. If binibigyan mo ng mga Amerikano ng ganyang kadaming access, although the other thing though, bro, is I was having a discussion again with some people with operational understanding. So Manny Mugato of Reuters, who won Pulitzer Prize a few years ago with Reuters for the coverage of Tatay Digong's drug war, horrible drug war. He was saying that actually, if you look at some of the facilities that we gave, some of them in Cagayan and all, it's not even a runway. It's just a site. It's not a military base. So good luck sa mga Amerikano. They have to spend billions to build up those areas, right? And then the other thing na inisip ko, Leloy, was, wait lang, Cagayan, Isabela, well, it's not also too far from Benam Rice or Philippine Sea. It may be in a way that could also help us to deter shenanigans happening there, Benam Rice and Philippine Sea, because, bro, we have 300 nautical miles of extended continental shelf and exclusive economic zone there. Our good friend Jay Batumbakal was very much involved in that process. And then we got to know the Chinese sent submarines there, their naming features, subterranean features there. So a lot of crazy stuff is also happening in Philippine Sea. So para sa akin, Leloy, tell me if I'm being naive here. I mean, obviously I'm not naive, but my point is, siguro naman, Marcos should be in a position to tell the Americans, hey, we're giving you all of this access and all, we're risking and all. Maybe you want to give us a bit more than usual, right? So, for instance, we have F-16V fighters kind of in the pipelines, Harpoon missiles, potentially Patriot. Like, there's so many things the U.S. is still holding back from from the Philippines for many reasons. Wala daw tayong maintenance capability, wala daw blah, blah, blah. But come on. I think this is the time where you have to juice it. I think this is the time the Philippines has to be aggressive and get the most. Kasi $100 million lang foreign military financing, $100 million lang to develop some of these facilities, that cannot even build you a Mall of Asia, right? Forget about
and I was just thinking,
juice
it not just in terms of military benefits. I'm sure there are economic benefits.
Yes, there is. Dun sa 2+ na nakalagay, USA, developmental. But ako, I want us to push for bilateral free trade agreement, etc. But I just don't know if Biden or next president of US, whoever, Trump, DeSantis, can deliver on that, on the trade economic issue. Ang hina ng US in terms of economic diplomacy.
Totoo. Pero I was reading an Inquirer article like 2 weeks ago. Apparently, we are trade deficit with China. And even at this rate, trade deficit tayo with China, meaning mas marami tayong ini-import sa kanila kaysa sa na-export natin sa kanila. And may slight surplus tayo with the US. So even on the trade level, sino mas mabait sa atin? Mas mabait pa rin sa atin on trade ang mga Amerikano. So even on the level of kind of economic exploitation, if you take on this kind of mercantilist mindset of dapat mas maraming exports kaysa sa imports, mas mabait sa atin ng US. And I think we can juice that with more agreements. Gayong nagpapakita na sila ng willingness to really play ball with us.
Right.
And so if Marcos plays his cards right, this could end up becoming really good for us. Richard, I want to, kasi hindi ako gano'n nagpe-pay attention to this. Kasi ayoko nga tumingin gano'n ng social media kasi hate na hate ko ang social media these days. But I wanted to ask you, when you were doing your podcast, ano na ang state of affairs between the Tatay Digong supporters and the Marcos supporters over this Edca issue? Nagkakapatayan na ba? May dugo, dumadanak na ba ang dugo?
Wait lang. Kanina may nakita akong meme. Ito bro, tingnan mo itong meme. So, isang button PBBM, isang button IME, tapos Marcos loyalist confused. I mean, I'm telling you now, this is the situation right now. Doon ka ba kay BBM or kay IME?
Okay.
So, magulo bro. Magulo ang Pilipinas ngayon. Sobrang magulo yung blogger sphere. I think the Edca issue, you would think na parang it's technical, mundane foreign policy, but it's so heated, bro. Like everyone has an opinion in it. It's an interesting situation. I never thought people would pay as much attention to it. But I cannot also blame people kasi the original Edca, we already got through the controversy part, but in-expand pa kasi ni BBM eh. Binigay pa niya yung mga bases sa Cagayan, sa Isabela. And then si Governor Mamba ng Isabela, this is I think the last part of this episode I want to talk to you about, has openly come out against it, brought out, calling on people to protest against it, etc. Okay, now what I want to say, Lelo, is that I have, I understand there are some legitimate concerns about I don't want it in my own backyard, right? I understand that. I also understand that there may be concerns about weaponization of this alliance with the United States to cover up for human rights violations inside the Philippines, or all sorts of. I have concerns about more foreign troops and abuses happening, like what happened during, in the Subic days, etc. Okay, I get it, but this is what I want to throw out there, Leloy. One of my biggest worries with federalism is that in a federalist situation, China will have to go just straight to LGU leaders and get the deals it wants out of those LGU leaders,
Oh
right?
shit, Richard,
Doesn't have to go
kinilabutan
to the
natin yun
national governance. Do you get what I'm saying? I was thinking
Hindi
about
ko naisip yun Kinilabutan ako dun, brother
weaponization of federalism, right? That's the worry I have. We're not even federal yet, but because our central government is so weak, my sense is that's already a potential option going on there. And there's a whole political science literature about sharp power operations targeting local government units. You just circumvent the national government because the national government has a pretension to national interest, blah, blah. Local government, we know what's going on there. So that's, it suddenly made me think about federalism. It's like, oh nga, no, pag nag-federal na tayo, you're not only strengthening warlords and trapos and dynasties potentially, you're also strengthening the ability of foreign powers to just go straight for the gold, right? Why should I go to the national government? I want something done in this frontier province, I'll get it. Well, just to be clear, I'm not saying that this is the case, particularly in Cagayan, Isabela, but I think it's a consideration. It's a factor that we have to consider in any national security discussion and any federalism discussion. Do you get where I'm coming from? Like,
yeah.
dami nagko-connect na bigla sa akin. Like, whoa, this is also that aspect, that weaponization of decentralization, if I can put it that way, right? Yeah.
So, let's close this discussion, and I want to close this on yung where I started. Hopefully, start from the very beginning, which is okay. How are we looking at the U.S. now? We already tackled this in a previous episode, but this is how I'm looking at the U.S. now, and I realized na I haven't thought enough about yung continuities ng U.S. I've been thinking about this juncture, yung
right.
Pagpapalit. Pero ito yung iniisip ko, nung panahon ng Cold War, nung 1960s, 1970s, talagang dapat matakot ka sa US. Dahil ang ginagawa ng US nung panahon na yon, kung hindi mo sila kakampi at kung nagpakita ka ng kahit konting suporta sa Soviet Union, pwede ka nilang yariin. So may mga CIA agents, for example, sa Indonesia, encouraging local revolts against the Sukarno government dahil si Sukarno, na hindi naman komunista, ay malapit sa mga komunista.
Right.
Pinatumba nila si Jacobo Arbenz.
Right.
Pinatumba nila
in Iran in 1953.
Pinatumba nila si Salvador Allende sa CIA. Dahil ang overwhelming concern ng US noon is wala kaming pakialam kung asshole ka or bastard ka, basta hindi ka komunista ka namin. At kung pro-komunista ka, patutumbayin ka namin. Nakakatakot talaga yung US.
Things were really bad back then, yeah.
Things were really bad, and this was kind of really horrible US foreign policy. So I understand na, kung boomer ka and you grew up during that era, takot ka talaga sa US. But I would
di ba nag-continue na until the Iraq War eh. So it's not like 90s. I also see the criticism, but for me, that was the peak eh. After that, there's a recognition. The world has changed. The world is not.
Mahirap na, Mahirap. In fact, it's in many ways, it's a bipartisan recognition, di ba? Kasi both the Democrats and the Republicans, ayaw na nila ng sugod kasi meron din namang isolationist tendencies ang US. So yun yung Cold War. Yep. Tapos of course, ang peak nun, yung rurok nun, yung Vietnam War, na talagang gigarahin mo yung buong bansa kahit gano'ng kahirap sila. At padadala mo yung mga bata mo doon kahit ang dami sa kanilang mamatay, basta malabanan mo yung komunismo. And of course, that was a spectacular failure, right? And that allowed for a certain moderation on the part of the US. Biro mo, after the Vietnam War, well, natigil yung ganong klaseng behavior for a while, and then na-resurrect yon with the emergence of the Bushes, 'di ba? Yung Iraq War. But even then, yung Iraq War at saka yung Afghanistan War, I mean, dalawang regime change efforts lang yun. Hindi pa rin ito equivalent nung height of the Cold War na multiple regime change efforts and daming CIA everywhere, right? So even then, spectacular and a spectacularly horrible mistake. Hindi na siya nagbago na siya. It's two wars as opposed to a global CIA effort to displace all of the pro-communist regimes, right? And then after that, talagang sobrang disillusion ng US dun sa ganong klaseng policy, and it manifested in the election of Barack Obama na talagang kaya niya natalo si George Bush, sabi niya wala nang mga gera na ganyan. And then of course
McCain, you mean McCain.
Yung replacement niya si Donald Trump, who could not be more different from Barack Obama, actually agreed with Obama na
his isolation is
ganong klaseng mga gera. So you can see na talaga nagbabago. And then once you get to Biden, I mean, Biden pulls out troops from Afghanistan, di ba? Meaning talagang full repudiation na ng Bush era policy. Right. So this is a very different beast. Now, in this podcast, we always talk about good faith, Richard, di ba? Yung parang good faith argument. I think a good faith argument should begin with an acknowledgement of the fact na nagbabago yung US. That this is a different foreign policy regime. Now, if you argue that this is a different foreign policy regime, pero delikado pa rin sila, makikinig ako sa'yo. Pero kung sinabi mong, pareho lang yan noong 1960, CIA pa rin nagpapatakbo ng Pilipinas, itong mga US agencies dito actually.
Get out of here! Get out of here!
CIA officials. Yan si Joseph Scalise, CIA agent yan. Hindi na kita kakausapin.
Yun nga yung nakakalungkot. You defend certain people against red tagging and then they do red reverse tagging to you.
Yes.
Shame on those people. Shame on them. I'll just say shame on them. I-splash ko sa mukha nila. Next time nagreklamo sila sa red tagging, i-splash ko sa mukha nila yung ginagawa niyo sa ibang tao. I'm not saying
exactly.
But they have to get their people in control. You know what I'm saying? All right? And the next time you bring it up, okay? So yeah, I'm honest. That really pissed me off. Kaya sabi ko kay Joseph, tingnan mo yung mga walang yang to. Dinidefend natin yung mga iba dyan, tapos gaganin ka pa ng mga yan. Talagang walang yang yan. Anyway, thank you very much, bro, for that. I mean, for me, I will end on a systemic note. No, the world is not the same. India, by the way, is now the largest country on earth. And my point is, if you're the Philippines, there is the US and China dynamic for sure. There's the two elephants for sure. But there are also hyenas, zebras, lions. You know, it's a zoo. So we should reach out to Japan. We should reach out to Australia. We should reach out to Korea. We should reach out to Europe. We should reach out to India. We should reach out to Turkey.
Yes, even ASEAN. Yes, even ASEAN.
And ASEAN, yeah, sure. Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam. Yeah. So my point is, this is my other big problem. Reducing the world to just US-China rivalry. That's so 1960s, 70s too. Because no, Japan is a big actor here. They're even bigger actor economically in the Philippines than China or US, by the way. India is coming up and they're literally the other elephant in the room, right? I mean, literally in the sense of symbol elephant. I mean, like, and then Korea is. So for me, I would still feel na hindi tayo fully nag-align sa US if actively we are also reaching out to other powers. Okay, now nakahanap na ako na way out of my own intellectual kind. Yep, I think if I see that, and in fairness, you know what encouraged me is Ambassador Romualdez, no, cousin of the president and ambassador to US, he himself said we need to diversify and reach out to other partners, to Japan, to Australia, etc. Because even he recognizes hindi pwede umasa lang sa US. I think that's the reason why na medyo kampante ako na I can see even they recognize that. And it's not just words. And nakikita ko sa actions yun eh. We're having a lot of... We had that in an episode on Japan. I said we are talking about JAFUs, Japan, Philippines, Australia, Europe. So for me, if we diversify and go beyond just US, then mas komportable ako na hindi tayo maging tuta ng Amerika. Because at the end of the day, whether US is good or not, I don't want dependence. But to paraphrase Winston Churchill, what's even worse than having not so good allies or being dependent on allies is not having allies, right? So I'm completely realistic about the situation we have, right? Yeah. Thank you very much, bro. On that note, I think
Akin lang, sana mabilis lang. Mga ka-Nexus, huwag magpapalaos. Kung yung speaking to 30 years ago pa, huwag naman kayo magpalaos. Yun lang naman namin sinasabi. Basa-basa tayo, i-update natin. Madali naman magbasa ng dyaryo, madali naman magbasa ng libro na ang copyright date ay hindi 1960 or 1970. Di ba? Huwag magpalaos. Kaya yan. Kaya niyo yan, Brad.
Huawei 15 na tayo, wag naman iPhone 1. Yan lang sinasabi ko, Huawei 15 na. Xiaomi na tayo, guys. Xiaomi. All right, bro. Thank you so much. And talk to you soon. Next episode, let's talk naman about domestic Philippine politics, right? And another form of denialism that we have to deal with. So from geopolitical denialism to post-electoral and political denialism. And the hard truths, no? These episodes are the hard truths one. Thank you very much, bro. And talk to you soon.
Thank you.